Hey guys, a quick note before we start this episode. This is Zach here. Two things real quickly. First, if you would like to help out Cinematary, these are two ways you can do it. The first one is sign up for our weekly newsletter. A link will be in the description, but it is also on our website at cinematary.com. If you go down toward the bottom where it says latest writing, right above that, you can type in your email. You just need your email and your first and last name. This is something that we hope to send out every Sunday with just updates on podcast episodes as well as our latest writing and maybe even some movie recommendations from our contributors. Just something to keep you guys up to date with what we're doing and not, make you worry about seeing all of our social posts because I'm sure it gets saturated with everything else. The other thing actually does really help the podcast. If you want to kind of help, we're always saying we don't want your money, and this is an easy way where you don't have to give us money, but we still get money, in the process, and that is by joining Radio Public. Radio Public is this really cool free iPhone app to listen to podcasts. It works just like Overcast or Apple Podcasts, just like that. But if you listen to Cinematary podcasts, actually the amount of listens, if we get to this X amount of listens, it will give us a little bit of cash, which, it's a small amount, but it'll be something that could help keep the lights on here at cinematary.com. So please, Radio Public, you can download it on Apple Podcast, on iTunes, and you can actually export if you have Apple Podcast or Overcast. Like I have Overcast, and it allowed me to export my data of all the podcasts that I'm listening to there onto Radio Public, and it's super easy. And it's a great way to help the podcast and help Cinematary out because, we are always looking for that help. So yeah, sign up for the weekly newsletter, join Radio Public if you would like to, but let's get to the show. And welcome to episode 190 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I am here with
Andrew Swafford,
Michael O'Malley,
Nathan Smith.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Tennessee Auteurs series with 2005's Hustle and Flow. This is one I'm sure everybody has been anticipating, especially Nathan, because it's 3-6 Mafia time. Let's go ahead and jump in into movies that we saw this week, and I guess we'll start with the big release that came out this past week, and that is the latest from Steven Spielberg, Ready Player One. This comes from the book by Ernest Cline, and it stars Ty Sheridan, Olivia Cook, Ben Mendelsohn, and Simon Pegg. Oh, and Mark Rylance. And it takes place in the year 2045, where the creator of this virtual reality world called the Oasis dies and leaves this video challenging all of its users to find his 3 Easter eggs. And the person who does that wins the whole system. During this time, people plug into this world and can be whatever they want to be. They have different avatars and all of these nice, wonderful, just amazing 80s references take place over the course of this 2-hour and 20-minute film. I talked about it a lot in my review on the site. So, Michael, I know you caught this also this week. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I did, and I think I'm a little of a piece with your review in that I did not like this movie. In fact, I feel like it's one of Steven Spielberg's worst movies.
So you're a big Spielberg fan.
I am a pretty big Spielberg fan. This is like knocking boots with Hook and Lost World for me. I don't hate it. I mean, there's a lot of vitriol against this movie, and like I was mostly just kind of like I just thought it was like kind of tedious. Your review gets into some pretty like philosophical reasons about like kind of the appropriation of intellectual property for nostalgia and all that. And I feel like inside this movie, or at least inside the premise, is a really fun version of this movie that I would have enjoyed. I've seen there's been a few like Lego movie comparisons, which I think are not off base. And the Lego movie does something pretty similar, which takes like, a lot of kind of nerd adjacent pop culture and just like kind of throws it in a blender and makes it like this kind of anarchic movie where you're just like mixing and matching like all these different brands in this kind of fun way. But for Ready Player One, I honestly just felt like except for like the challenges that were really like lampshaded, where they were like we're making a reference. Like most of this was just kind of like a traditional action movie with like Funko Pop skins almost. Like you could have traded out these references without changing too much of the movie. And I feel like that's really where it kind of got tedious for me, is that I didn't feel like it was doing anything with this like nostalgic illusions except just showing us things that we could freeze frame later on and find Where's Waldo and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really what kind of just makes it so hollow to me. It just feels like it's this kind of wet dream that Ernest Cline had that we all have to live in, and it's just rough. And yeah, I talked about it in my review, but the way in which they trade this nostalgia, it's almost it's a different brand than like Stranger Things or something, where they're making these references and it's kind of winking at you. This one's not really winking at you, it's slapping you in the face with these, and it in the way that they interact with them is so it's just kind of toxic, because I mean it's all about it's the crux of everybody's relationship to each other. It's like nobody has any anything that they can base a friendship or a romantic relationship or a familial relationship or anything, unless it's based on some sort of pop culture reference or pop culture knowledge. And it all kind of boils down to the Mark Rylance character, who is the creator of this whole world, and kind of, and Spielberg kind of frames him as this Willy Wonka kind of character. And he I just don't feel like that's I don't really see that. I think that there's a lot that this movie's not really engaging with, that it poses a lot of questions, and it just doesn't have that warmth that allows this character to be somebody like that.
Yeah, and I mean like that's the just the dead weight of the movie is the characters, and the book is like this too, which I read. Which is that there's a big exposition dump at the beginning of the movie that sets up some possible like interesting beats for like these characters to dramatically walk through, right? Like, so this kid lives in the projects of like Columbus, Ohio, where like trailer homes are like stacked on top of one another and stuff like that, and he's living with his aunt with like who's got an abusive boyfriend, and he has to kind of like go and hide away to go onto the Oasis, and there's like all this stuff that like is kind of setting you up for this typical like or maybe not typical, but like just there's a lot of dramatic ground to be sown here, but it just is left there with nothing to do.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, or at least people haven't talked about it enough, how like objectively terrible and boring this lead character is. Like,
jeez,
he's so
terrible.
like there's just nothing remotely, like they had to kill his parents to make him remotely interesting. Like he's
does he have to be a stereotypical like teen boy video game avatar?
Well, everybody's that, so it kind of makes that.
Yeah,
that's what makes that tough. Like that's what's weird. It's not even like he's kind of like, oh, he's an outcast. People bully him, but there's not even any of that. He's just boring. Like at the end of the day, you're just like, I'm sorry, you're just a boring, lifeless person.
And when you mentioned that, like they kill his parents, which is like pre the beginning of the movie, like he's like, oh, I'm an orphan and I'm living with my aunt. But then like mid movie, they like kill off some of like the people he knows too, in a way to like kind of motivate him. But again, that's like a scene that happens and then like he just kind of moves on. Like it's so bizarre.
I think those people like were probably pumped because they got out of having to deal with this boring ass. But it's funny. I saw some people talking about the Olivia Cooke character, who's the kind of love interest of the main character. His name's Wade Watts, to just kind of make your stomach churn a little bit.
His parents wanted him to sound like a superhero.
Yeah, it's just
that's literally the reason
that's enough.
why.
But yeah, the Olivia Cooke character. A lot of people are going, is this a manic pixie dream girl? And I'm like, I think in a perfect world, they would love for her to be that, but honestly, she's more of this character is wildly more interesting, and honestly should have just been the lead character of this movie rather than being any sort of manic pixie whatever. Like she's a lot more interesting. She's not like that much more interesting, but she still at least has some sort of character to her that makes you probably want to check out that movie where she's in the lead. But
Well,
I
the movie kind of stealth makes her the lead by the end. Like she's the one doing all the interesting stuff at the end of the movie, whereas Wade Watts is fucking playing Atari.
He is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much more to add on. Like I said, I wrote about it at length for the Cinematary website, so please check it out there. But yeah, I this movie just kind of made me sad. I take no joy in being like this is a terrible Steven Spielberg movie, and it's just like when I left the theater, I just was so sad.
Before we move on from Ready Player One, I have two questions about it. One is, do you guys think there's any credence at all to people making the argument that Ready Player One is criticizing nostalgia culture and the cultural capital to be had from getting all of the references? You know, David Ehrlich wrote this piece about Spielberg possibly regretting inventing the modern blockbuster. Do you think that there's any validity to that?
I think I definitely agree that Spielberg's working through some stuff in this movie. And I and I talked a little bit about it in my review, but because I think he kind of almost sees himself a little bit as like the Mark Rylance character, as this person who created something and it has a lot of like it definitely puts a lot of references of stuff that he's interested in into his own work. I mean, you watch Spielberg movies and you can find allusions to Stanley Kubrick and Alfred Hitchcock and many other classic movies. But he's also this kind of figure who like just kind of gave this to people and then they just ran off and made a whole new life with it. And I feel like he almost wants to be kind of like this character and just be like, I'm glad that you guys enjoyed this, but I'm gonna go right off into the sunset and the end. And I'm kind of like, well, hold up there, Steven. You also made this, you know, this was pretty much a porn site for nostalgia that you just created and gave us as a movie. You need to. This is not a good way to reckon with that. So I don't know. I'm not sure it really has any critique of nostalgia, because at the end of the day, it's just like, hey, this stuff's fun, but maybe go outside once in a while.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing is the movie ends by saying literally like maybe we should spend some time in the real world after a movie in which we've seen people having like an awesome time.
It's like the Nintendo Wii, like every now and then reminding you should go play outside.
Yeah, or like the fact that Shigeru Miyamoto said that like he was inspired by like roaming the countryside when he invented these video games, which is just like there's a lot of irony in that.
Speaking of, Zach, you mentioned Spielberg always quoting other filmmakers in his movies. This is something that Michael and I were talking about off mic, and your thoughts being that referentiality in movies is not necessarily a negative thing, and a lot of times critics view it as mostly a net positive. So how do you feel like it works differently here?
I think this way there's just a real blatant attempt to like evoke your emotions of nostalgia through the references. Like there's nothing subtle about Wade Watts, the main character, getting in the DeLorean and using that to drive around. There's nothing really subtle about on this car chase course King Kong jumping out. There's nothing really subtle about Master Chief from the Halo series popping up at a random point. While whenever you have these kind of references in previous Spielberg movies, just right now what I'm thinking of is kind of a Hitchcock bird's eye shot in Raiders of the Lost Ark when the monkey eats the poison date. Like those, I think those are more references that I guess are subtler to the average moviegoer. People who are more, I guess, cinematically literate would probably get those. And I know that's probably something that even myself has complained about, references in that sense by previous filmmakers. But I think in the case of Ready Player One, it's just like Michael said earlier, there's no real reason for the references to be there. They're just there to evoke some sort of emotion out of you, and that seems almost I don't know, that seems almost wrong. I mean, for God's sake, I guess spoiler alert, but there's like a extended sequence in this movie where the characters are going through the hotel of The Shining, and it
Okay,
makes
I
me
like that
super.
part actually.
It made me it was super weird because I'm just kind of like, this is a movie that when all of these things that these nostalgic moments that you're enjoying right now, when that movie came out, nobody really liked it as much. It was kind of panned. It's also kind of a strange addition to this nostalgia fest that seems much more populous. I don't know. I understand that fine line, but I feel like Ready Player One is trying to do something much more blatant when it comes to nostalgia.
I'm gonna actually push back on that just a ton because like one of the critiques of like the culture that Ready Player One engages in, that people will say, and this is more true of the book, but it's definitely true of the movie as well, is that there's like a gatekeeping element to cultural referentiality, wherein like, for example, in the Shining sequence, the character who doesn't know The Shining is like shamed throughout that sequence. Like, dude, you haven't seen The Shining, and I don't think that, like, for me, what makes references work in other movies is that only a select few people know them. Like that's not exactly what I find interesting about references. I guess I find it interesting when those references are in conversation with the movie we're currently watching, which is what I actually feel like happens in that Shining sequence in Ready Player One. Is that's like one of the only times when we see Ready Player One, the movie, actually in conversation with the references rather than just throwing up a reference. So I guess I don't care if it's subtle necessarily, and I like I said earlier, I can imagine a very unsubtle version of Ready Player One that I would have enjoyed a lot more.
Is there also an element of this where like just the cultural capital that the movie is referencing is tainted in some way because of the culture that has sprung up around all of these things? Like, I'm specifically thinking of Gamergate on the internet. Like, I would love to see, my dream movie would be a version of Ready Player One where the villain is Anita Sarkeesian and she wins. I'm wondering, do you think that Spielberg has heard of this stuff? Is this a concern?
Spielberg's a gamer. I'm pretty sure he must have heard of it.
He had to have heard of it, but there's also like a lot of this movie is really playing in this, while it has this kind of weird line that it's towing, where on one end you see this kind of sadness in that all these people are logged into this virtual world, and there's a lot of shots in the movie of like him either panning up and going over, above and over the apartments and showing the people doing different things in their apartments alone, or literally people on the streets just walking and interacting and doing stuff, or at work doing stuff, and it just seems kind of sad. But then you go into the actual Oasis, and there's, I guess, a community there, and it kind of reminds me of, people who spend extended periods of time playing something like World of Warcraft or League of Legends, or some sort of online community where even though you're not actively engaging people in reality, you're still creating some sort of community and interacting with people in a digital sense. And maybe and this is just my personal thing, because I really don't find any fun in that type of gaming, and so I just kind of found all of that trying to herald this type of community as, I was like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but it's still kind of sad.
Yeah, those shots of like the people just kind of interacting with the air when they have the Oasis visors on were like really puzzling in the movie, because at certain points they like undercut really like serious moments within the Oasis, and he just like cuts to like people just like punching air, and it's strange. It's like one of those things where it's like, well, this could be really interesting commentary if the movie did anything with it, but it just kind of happens and left there.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to dig into that more when I was writing about it, but like, I don't know, I didn't really know where to like really jump in with that, because yeah, there's just something happening there with that duality between the virtual community and the actual community that's just, I don't know, something that's kind of unsettling in 2018 especially. But yeah, Ready Player One, it is in theaters now if you would like to see it. But I'm going to pass the mic over to Nathan. You had a movie you would like to talk about.
Yeah, so the first film that I wanted to talk about is actually will be playing at the Public Cinema at the Knoxville Museum of Art, I believe,
Yes,
Um,
I think it is.
the Sunday after this episode comes out, so hopefully you're listening to it if you're in Knoxville um, before Sunday, because I think this is a movie that is definitely worth your time. It is the latest film from the French filmmaker Arnaud, and not good at the
I think
French.
it's no.
Yeah, Arnaud Desplechin, who is a filmmaker who I'm not really intimately familiar with, but he has directed films like My Sex Life, A Christmas Tale, Kings and Queen. The only film of his that I've seen was his last film from 2015, My Golden Days, which I thought was a really fantastic sort of coming of age movie. Um, this film stars, let me pull up the cast list. Mathieu Amalric, also just I think butchered his name. Marion Cotillard, Charlotte Gainsbourg, and Louis Garrel. A really outstanding ensemble of some of the finest French acting talent today. It is if you're familiar with Desplechin or if you're not familiar with his movies, I think the thing that most people seem to say about them is that they not all of them. My Golden Days isn't so much this way, and like I said, I'm not the most well versed in his work, but the sense that I get is that his movies have a very frantic energy to them. There's often a lot going on, a lot of relationships, um, and they're sort of just the product of a frazzled, constantly moving brain. And there's often in the movies a sort of Desplechin stand-in who has been played in a number of movies by Amalric, and he's once again sort of returning to this character who's not, the same exact character throughout these movies, but because there's a parallel between the filmmaker and the main character, they're sort of a certain type. Um, the titular Ismael is a middle-aged filmmaker in France. He has been fairly successful. We get the sense. We don't know tons about his career, but he's a notable filmmaker, and he is in the middle of writing a screenplay that is about his younger brother, who's played by Louis Garrel. And this is sort of a strange spy thriller. We learn that his brother was a diplomat who wasn't actually a spy, but this is sort of based off of Ismael's sort of imagination of what his brother's life abroad as a diplomat might have been like. And so it's sort of it's if you watch the trailer, it really sells this movie as this sort of mysterious romance, which on the one hand it very much is, but the movie begins inside this screenplay that Ismael's writing. So it begins with this sort of busy spy thriller where we're talking about this brother character whose name escapes me at the moment. His name is Yvonne, and you're hearing all these people talk about Yvonne. Who is Yvonne? Yvonne disappeared. What's going on? And then you come out and you are introduced to Ismael. You learn that he has been dating for several years a woman played by Charlotte Gainsbourg, who is this very distinguished astrophysicist, this brilliant woman. And you learn also that he was married to another woman played by Marion Cotillard, Carlotta, who very shortly into their marriage, they married very young, completely disappeared. She was never found. After a period of time, they declared her dead, even though there was no real evidence to prove her death. And so while he's working on this screenplay, Ismael and Sylvia, the Charlotte Gainsbourg character, they go away to the beach so he can get some much needed solitude and work on his project, which has been driving him crazy. And who is to show up but his former wife, Carlotta, who is a living person. She is very much alive, but is in some sense is the ghost of the title, or at least one of the ghosts of the title. And it becomes very clear that she intends to return to her old life, even though She left it willingly by choice for 20 years and intends to take her husband back, which leads to some romantic and dramatic conflict. And this is only about halfway through the movie, um, and I won't really spoil what happens, but I will say that Ismael sort of undergoes this mental breakdown, basically. Um, my friend Adam Katzman, who has a really outstanding Twitter that you can follow at Maltese Rebel, he tweeted this great tweet that has the now iconic meme of Charlie Day and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is not a show I watch, but I'm just familiar with the image of like all of the papers on the wall with the strings connecting them in this like really paranoid conspiracy image. And the movie like literally becomes that about 2/3 of the way through as Ismael is going through this breakdown. And so, like I said, Displetion is this very frantic, energetic filmmaker, but that's one of the things that has really started to fascinate me as I'm dipping my toes into his work. There's something about the film, to me, that sort of reminds me of like later Coppola or Raul Ruiz, in that this movie is sort of like a labyrinth without a center, where you're a little confused. It's not necessarily like a puzzle movie where there's an answer that you're trying to find or something that really needs to be solved, but you're on unstable ground and there's not necessarily something to anchor you. A lot of the time, Desplechin will adopt a style for really only one scene. There's this moment where uh, Ismael is like out of his mind on pills. He's drunk. He's going crazy, and he's on a train. And there are all these images and maps and like scenes from his childhood overlaid on the window of this train, and it's this very surreal moment that is unlike anything else in the movie. And that style is adopted just for that scene. Um, like a lot of the first third is this very romantic, intriguing, calm movie, save for this really fantastic scene where Marion Cotillard wildly dances to Bob Dylan. It's this kind of classic French movie, but then you also start going in and out of this spy thriller that Ismael is writing, and you're having all this espionage and this intrigue. So it sort of fits into the style of movie that I've been really fascinated with lately, which I don't really have a name for, but they're these sort of movies where I talked about Francis Ford Coppola's Youth Without Youth recently on the podcast, which I think is another example of this type of movie where it's sort of mutating genres from scene to scene as it needs to change, as it needs a new language to articulate the emotional experience of the character. It will adopt a new style or a new generic framework. And this movie really does that, which is definitely disorienting for some people. I mean, it makes the movie really hard to sell. And I think the trailer doesn't really reflect what the movie is at all. And in fact, the movie was really torn apart at Cannes. It was the opening night film at the 2017 Cannes Film Festival. The version that's being released now is about 20 minutes longer and is technically the director's cut, even though it's the regular release version. So I don't really know what the difference is there, but it was really torn apart. And it is a complicated movie. It's not dense necessarily, but it's can be hard to find your groundwork. But I do think it is a really fascinating movie, and it's one that I've been thinking a lot and puzzling over ever since, just because it just changes so much. It just has this crazy energy and momentum to it that I really enjoyed, and I hope that people listening to this will who are in Knoxville will go to the public cinema and will see it. It's being released by Magnolia Pictures, I believe, so it should have a somewhat wide-ish release, and will hopefully turn up on video on demand and all those good services sometime this year. I definitely recommend checking out, whether or not you're familiar with Desplechin. I think it's a really fun and fascinating movie.
Yeah, I'm certainly planning on going to the public cinema screening and hopefully watching My Golden Days to prepare for it.
My Golden Days is actually is it a sequel or a prequel to My Sex Life?
Aren't they all connected in some way or another?
Are they? I've only seen
overlapping characters.
I've only seen My Golden Days and realized after the fact that it was narratively connected to at least My Sex Life. I'm not sure about the other ones.
Yeah, I had actually totally forgotten about that, but I think you're right. And I do think he's one of those filmmakers where, he's working through so many of the same themes and, character types over and over again, where there is a sort of a connection through a lot of his movies. But yeah, I had actually totally forgotten. My Golden Days was a
I saw Darren mention on Facebook to on a personal thread that he said that he could see this movie being like a 5-part miniseries rather than an actual feature film. It's and just judging from that, and judging from what I know about all the overlapping characters, it does seem like he's doing a this broader cinematic universe sort of thing that we usually see more on
yeah,
TV.
and there it is.
But
It is.
yeah,
It has so much packed in, and I mean, like I was saying, so many stylistic shifts. But I do think the fact that it is contained in a 2-hour narrative really speaks to the mental state of the main character. Even though there are times where you're not with him and it's not at all about him and it's about another character. I do think you really get the experience that this is the mind of someone who's being pulled in 1,000 different directions. So I think the fact that you have all these styles collapsed into 2 hours, um, for me at least, was to the benefit of the film. But I definitely could see it being stretched out into something longer, just because there is this sort of mysterious aspect to it where it's his wife returns and there's all these questions that are raised, and um, yeah.
Very cool. You had another movie?
Yeah, okay. I didn't know if we still had time or not. So real quickly, I watched this week Alan Clark's Elephant, which is a BBC TV film from 1989. The reason why I watched this, I'd been meaning to see it for a while, just because Alan Clark is somebody who is not, necessarily a household name, but is honestly seems to be sort of like a Velvet Underground type filmmaker to other filmmakers. He's somebody who just pops up again and again in a lot of citations of influence from filmmakers that I like. You can really see the influence of this movie on something like Bertrand Bonello's Nocturama, which was one of my favorite movies from last year. Um, People like Harmony Korine have stated that Alan Clark is an influence, and this movie actually might be somewhat familiar to American audiences, just because it was a large stylistic influence, and also the source of the title for Gus Van Sant's Elephant, his film loosely inspired by the Columbine massacre, and they're very structurally similar, and they're also both films that deal with harrowing violence. This movie is about the Troubles, which were the decades-long sectarian conflict in Northern Ireland between the largely Protestant loyalists in Northern Ireland who wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, and the largely Catholic Republicans in Ireland who wanted Northern Ireland to unify with Ireland itself. And this conflict, I mean, is something that's never really been resolved necessarily, but really lasted from the 60s through the 1990s. So basically, this is a 40-minute long film, like I said, originally broadcast on television, though it's played since in theaters. And basically, what it is, it's these, I think it's like 10 or 12 basically episodes that are all almost structurally identical, or at least very similar. And what you have is you have just this anonymous person. You don't know you never know who they are. You never know the context, and they're just walking, like very determined walking. And Clark is following them close behind with a steady cam, and you just hear these loud footsteps, and then they will come upon another person, and they will immediately take out a gun and shoot that person. And you will see them walk away. Then the camera will return to the body of the person they have just executed. It will stay there for a moment, and then you will cut to the next instance of violence where you see another person walking, and then boom, they kill someone, and it just continues and continues and continues. The name of the film comes from a quote at the beginning. You don't know who says this, but there's just a quote on screen that says, "For some of us, the Troubles is the elephant in our living room." Um, so it's really a film sort of about the persistence of violence, and this constant cyclical nature of violence. Um, but it's just been in my head ever since I watched it. Um, it's it's so structurally simple in a way, and it sounds like something that might I mean, it does get repetitive, but there's just something about it that is so forceful, that it's hard to look away from. I mean, you just have, you know, like I said, you just have sound of footsteps, 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 and then these loud gunshots, and all the killings are totally removed from context. They're all apparently based on real instances. All of the things that you see are taken from real accounts of killings in the Troubles, but you don't know who the people are. You don't know where you are. You never know anything except that one person is killing another. And I was doing some reading about this because I TA for a class where this week we watched Gus Van Sant's Elephant, so I wanted to watch this as well because I'd been meaning to, and there's the connection between the two films. And I was doing a little bit of reading about it, and something that I came across said that this film seems to imagine a world in which the only way that people can interact with each other is through violence. I mean, it's the only way you ever see another person in this film interact with another person is when one of those people is killing the other. And there's just something about that. I mean, that idea is extremely uncomfortable and hard to sit with, but I mean, I don't know really intimately about Irish history, about the Troubles. I have a general sense, but it really, I think, it just amazingly sort of communicates this sort of stagnant, forever war, where, violence is not planned on this grand military scale. It just happens in this very ordinary way, and it happens for decades, and it can happen at any time. It's the kind of movie that in some things I've read, people have said this, and I can kind of understand the sentiment where people might say, oh, this might work better as an art installation in a gallery, which I can see because it has this repetitive structure and is something I could see being played on a loop. But I think the thing about installation art is so often, even if the works are very long, people walk up to it, they look at it for a minute, they say, okay, I get the idea, and then they walk away, even if the thing is not over, really, even if it's, a 20-minute piece that's continuing. And I feel like this is something where, I can imagine people sitting down and watching this on TV and wanting to change the channel, or probably changing the channel. But I think it's something where it's like you have to sit with it through the entire time. You have to really get this structure ground into you. It's something to me where I think watching it and like watching all of it is super important to really get the emotional effect that Clark is going for. Like I said, it's about 40 minutes long. Some very kind person has uploaded it to YouTube. Hopefully it will remain there. And actually a lot of Clark's other films, which are often, because he was largely working for television, a lot of them are around an hour or so, and you can find them on YouTube. His maybe most famous movie is called Made in Britain, and was sort of the film that launched Tim Roth. Tim Roth in that movie plays a young skinhead. So he's working with a lot of social issues and things like that. And I think he's a filmmaker who also sort of demands our attention just because, we did a whole episode about this, but, the divide between television and film grows more tenuous with the passing of every year. And I think he's someone who's very interesting just because he is like a television auteur. He's somebody who made films for television, but really had a distinct voice, a distinct way of looking at the world. So many of his films use steady cams and really use the long take in a very provocative and charged and potent way. And this is, I just haven't been able to get this movie out of my head.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to take a short break. We'll be back with our discussion of 2005's Hustle and Flow after this.
Hi there, Cinematary listeners. This is your favorite Filipino podcaster, Jessica Carr, with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we surprisingly do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company, and we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because apparently this will help increase our podcast exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send us an email at cinematary@yahoo.com so we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you can tell us where the money from Fargo is stashed, or maybe you don't think In the Mood for Love is the sexiest movie you've ever seen. Regardless, let us know your thoughts and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think really enjoy listening to us and participating in our film discussions. We also have some cool merchandise that you can check out on the site. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and now back to the show.
What's up? You know what I'm saying? Let me get a bottle of smoke, you know what I'm saying? We gotta get the one.
Walk that drink, yeah. 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 Walk that drink, yeah.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 190 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Tennessee Auteurs series with 2005's Hustle and Flow. It was written and directed by Craig Brewer. And the film stars Terrence Howard, Taraji P. Henson, Anthony Anderson, Taryn Manning, DJ Qualls, and Ludacris. The film follows DJ, a Memphis hustler and pimp, who follows his aspirations to become a rapper. The film is dedicated to Sun Records founder Sam Phillips. As concepts of both hustle and flow are unique to African American culture, it turned out to be nearly impossible to find proper translations for international release of the film. For example, the Russian translation of the title means the bustle and the motion. The Italian title is appended with Il colore della musica, which means the color of music.
No. No.
Oh, man.
The film experienced many years of near misses and outright rejection from major studios and potential financiers before finally being backed by its longtime supporter, John Singleton. In the DVD extra, Singleton says that he decided at last to put up the money himself because he was exasperated at his friends not getting what their film deserved. Howard initially turned down the role of DJ. He reportedly was attempting to avoid being typecast as a, quote, pimp archetype. However, after recognizing the complexity and depth of the character, he reversed his earlier decision and took on the role. To prepare for his role, Howard interviewed 123 pimps and 78 prostitutes over 2.5 years. He lived with 4 different pimps, including a month-long stint in a Memphis brothel.
Move over, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, yeah, really.
Al Capone became involved in the film because of a case of mistaken identity. Director Craig Brewer was expecting a phone call from Paul Beauregard because he wanted to hire him to write the songs DJ would perform. Capone, who knew Brewer from the Memphis music scene, called him at the very same time. He told Brewer that the movie needed to have his music in it, and Brewer immediately agreed. After a few minutes of small talk, Brewer realized he was talking to the wrong person. Too embarrassed to back out of the deal, Brewer told Capone that he could audition with one song. Capone had 24 hours to write a song for DJ. He was sent the script by courier and was given Terrence Howard's phone number to discuss the character. The next day, Capone performed Hustle and Flow, It Ain't Over for Brewer and producer John Singleton. They loved the song so much they used 3 more of Capone's songs for the soundtrack. Brewer added several touches from his personal life in the script. His wife worked in a strip club, then got pregnant. He had turned off the air conditioning to edit or the fuse would blow. He actually saw a black pimp and a white prostitute with braids in a car trying to hustle up some business near a local hotel. DJ's gold watch, which belongs to his late father, actually belonged to Craig Brewer's late father and mentor, Walter. DJ said, this was just kind of a weird fact that I came across, but DJ says the word man 221 times in this movie.
Maine.
I believe it's pronounced Maine.
I apologize. The film contains numerous references to famous Memphis-based musicians, but Craig Brewer deliberately avoided any direct references to Elvis Presley. In an interview, he said,
Thank goodness.
quote, "That was a rule, no Elvis."
God bless him for that.
Michael, at some point during this episode, we're going to need your anti-Elvis tirade as
here
a
we go.
Memphis local. But anyways, sorry.
On his review, Roger Ebert said, "Hustle and Flow shows, among other things, what a shallow music video approach many films take to the inner city, and then what complexities and gifts bloom there. Every good actor has a season when he comes into his own, and this is Terrence Howard's time. The New York Times said the movie, which scored an audience award in a big money distribution deal at Sundance, is a volatile mixture of slickness and sincerity, hard-edged naturalism, and sheer show business hokum. It's certainly live, with fine performances and a strong soundtrack, including music from the Memphis rappers Al Capone and 3 6 Mafia, but never quite real. A rough, sticky sense of place. You can almost smell the sweat of Memphis coming off the screen. Dresses up a story so conventional that it sometimes verges on self-parody. Mr. Brewer's attempt to fuse hip-hop, street credibility, art house cachet, and follow your dream triumph of the underdog Hollywood uplift is canny but clumsy. The AV Club said, much like Eminem's 8 Mile, the vibrant rap drama Hustle and Flow wraps the authentic around the inauthentic, telling a underdog story that sticks to formula, yet resonates with an undeniably real energy and texture. And finally, Wesley Morris of the Boston Globe said, full of cuss words and trips to nudie bars and jail, Hustle and Flow is ultimately a lot more familiar, an odds-beating tale of redemption and dreams come true. Some will find it chicly inspired, recalling blaxploitation's heyday with its grimy urban realism. Some will rightly call it corny, absurd, and an insultingly limited presentation of options for the most disenfranchised African Americans. I'm still waiting for the movie fantasy about the pimp who wants to get his GED. Still, most will agree that Terrence Howard's acting as the hustler hero is remarkable. All right, on that note, let's jump into Hustle and Flow. One of the things that I kind of came across, not just in those reviews, but a lot of the research I was doing on this and kind of looking at other reviews from when it came out, was a lot of people kind of hit on that line of this is kind of a conventional movie. It kind of plays by the beats that you've seen before. Was that something you guys picked up on? Was that something that didn't work for you?
I think a big thing that so like I think like a lot of the plot structure is like right up to like the kind of happy ending where he finally breaks big, but there's also like, and Andrew and I were talking about this before the podcast started, there's this really confounding and disturbing sense where it's like leading you through traditional like Cinderella story beats, but also presenting these characters in really uncomfortable and like at times like horrific ways. Like Terrence Howard's character throws this woman and her baby like out on the street at one point. Terrence Howard like pimps another character so he can buy a microphone, and this woman doesn't just like go along with it. She like comes out in tears like after she's given this pawn shop guy a blowjob. Like there's like it goes through these traditional beats, but it like really rubs your face in some of the like seedier elements of like the like not coming of age, but like the success story from this guy with really limited resources.
And gives him, we were also talking about, a mixture of punishment and reward, right? He becomes the star that he wants to be, yet he's also in prison. And there's a time thing going on there. He's only in prison for 12 months or so, whereas he's probably going to be famous for longer than that. So maybe the movie is kind of tilting more in his favor than it is not, but it's still presenting him in a very complex light. And we were also talking about how it doesn't really comment upon the the specifically misogynistic acts while it's happening. You just have to kind of do the storytelling calculus and figure out through the system of punishment and reward what the movie thinks about him, and it is complicated for sure.
I definitely, there were a lot of things in the movie that did feel very I think Wesley Morris hits on something when he says that some will find it corny, because there definitely were quite a few things in the movie where was sort of like, come on, like the whole thing with the ludicrous character where it's like, oh, like, you gotta remember your roots, and gotta remember the hometown where you came from. Just felt. Like I've heard these things before, and then the whole thing
that's a very southern thing, though.
It's
you're right.
Memphis
You're right.
Say.
But it was just like, like I don't know. And then immediately after that, like the whole thing in the bathroom where DJ has to pull out his gun and starts he beats up Skinny Black and then shoots a guy and then goes to jail. It was just sort of like. I mean, this is a character that is obviously breaking the law and like doing all these terrible things to people throughout this movie. But just something about that, I just felt like it just felt. I mean, I'm not somebody who's often like, oh, screenwriting 101, like criticizing the writing of a movie, but something about that just felt like very kind of lazy, like introductory screenwriting, like sort of the opposite of a Deus Ex Machina, like the bad version of that, of like, let's just do this like bad thing to this character. Whereas I think it would be a much more interesting movie if like, he finds out Skinny Black's not actually going to listen to his tape, and then he's just sort of like, what do I do from here? I don't know, like a more ambiguous. And I also think the thing about the ending of the movie too is it is this happy ending, but also just thinking about it sort of larger terms, like I mean, the reason why I was originally interested in this movie was because I love 3-6 Mafia, and this is the movie. You didn't mention this in your intro, but this is the movie that won them an Academy Award. So now Juicy J in his Twitter bio can say Oscar winner Juicy J, and it is the God certified truth. But I just thinking about like that ending, sort of like in the history of rap music. It's like he does get this taste of success, but we have no indication that it's actually going to last or that it's actually going to really go anywhere. And the great likelihood is that he's probably going to be somebody who had, he had a couple local hits or couple regional hits, and then that's it, and his career stalls out.
He's like a Trinidad James.
Yeah, or Memphis, has a lot of rappers like that. I mean, the whole South does, the whole world of rap does. So it is, I don't know, it is like, it is both this happy ending, but there's also a part of me that like, I'm like, want this greater ambiguity to it, I guess.
I think like that idea, I'm only just now thinking of this, but I mean like the Memphis music scene is really interesting because like the heavy hitters like Justin Timberlake, for instance, and all that are not really known for being tied to Memphis, right? The music that's like distinctively Memphis is in the past. Isaac Hayes, Elvis, all that. And whereas like a lot of the people who are like in the Memphis music scene now, either A, like really struggle to break out, or B, don't really stay there. And so like that like tension, and even that scene that's kind of corny where it's like, don't forget your roots, like that kind of does feel like really specific to Memphis. My brother is actually a aspiring musician in Memphis, and he runs into a lot of the same stuff where like, it's like for a city with such a big music history that it's kind of a small pool in a lot of ways, and having success within the city doesn't necessarily mean much success beyond that, and you kind of have to get a lucky break to do that. So I don't know. There's some interesting dynamics going on with like how it's using place and his level of success.
Mm-hmm.
I think also going back to your point about the scene with Ludacris, I don't know, to me it seems like it would be the kind of cliche storybook ending if, because that scene kind of starts out where there's a little animosity. It seems kind of like Ludacris is going to blow him off, and then Terrence Howard's character, DJ, kind of wins him over. And I feel like it would be more cliche if, he kind of won him over and then he was like, all right, yeah, I will listen or something. And then they all kind of, go and skip off along the merry rainbow. I think that kind of the fact that it plays out like it plays out, again, kind of harkens back to just that something that we've been playing with this entire movie, which is DJ is always trying to kind of get into the whatever he perceives as the right way, and whenever he does, he's getting dragged back into the way that he's always been.
And are we meant to assume at the end, when these prison guards give him their tape, that he's going to do the same thing that Ludacris did to him? I actually don't know the answer to that question because of how straight it plays that moment.
And especially like given his sort of penchant for using people throughout the movie, and we don't really have any indication as to whether he has experienced some kind of sincere change of heart in his run-in with Ludacris. I guess for me, I'm like, maybe this is like, I don't necessarily want like, the skip down the happy road, like Ludacris is his best friend now and they're gonna go on tour or whatever. But I don't know. I just feel like the movie would be more interesting if maybe that plays out and he is but he just sort of like, you don't have this like moment of violence. You just sort of have him like saying like, what do I do now? This whole movie has basically been him. I mean, him hustling people, him telling people, oh, yeah, I know Skinny Black, I'm going to put my tape in Skinny Black's hand, and then it's all going to, like, come together. Not just for me, but for everybody that I know, and everybody who I've dragged into this. And I don't know, I just would kind of like to see the movie where that, like, I'm struggling with how to articulate.
Is
but
the
like
question
once
he has a hit single, but he still has no like wealth to speak of or any sort of social status?
No,
where do you go from there?
Maybe, but not even that. Like I feel like having this moment of violence erupt, honestly, like avoids really dealing with him as a character. Like if he just had him go into the bathroom. He sees that Ludacris, like, threw the tape in the toilet. Ludacris is passed out drunk. Like, he doesn't, start punching him. He just sort of leaves and is, like, has to figure out what to do now, now that he's, hustled everybody and told everybody and, people have put work and money and time into all this for him. Then he has to figure out where to go from there and how to, like, maybe not do it himself. Like, maybe the movie just sort of ends with that. But I don't know. It's like I feel like having that moment of violence is like maybe like makes us more sympathetic in a way to this complicated character, even though he's doing a thing that we say is bad. It's like he's sort of his hand has been forced, and then he like actually has to like really get it together in this very dramatic way of like, oh no, I'm going to jail. No, I like have to do the right thing. I don't know.
No, I think that makes sense. I think that it would be interesting if, like you said, the scene kind of plays out similarly, and Ludacris is there, and he's throwing the tape in the toilet, and yeah, DJ just leaves, and then it's kind of like, well, what do I do now? I've hustled my way to this point, and now I'm just kind of now I hit. It's kind of like I hit the home run, but it actually ended up not mattering in the larger scheme of the game. Yeah, I think no, I agree. I guess that would be more I was like, if everybody was just skipping along the road and it was like, yeah, we're best buddies, then I would be like, oh, come on, please.
Well, one of the things, I don't know. Somebody else go ahead. I was talking for a while.
Okay, I was just going to say that I have a question about 3 6 Mafia and to what extent 3 6 Mafia is involved here, because I was actually super surprised, Zach, when you were reading out the fact sheet and we were talking about this other rapper, Al Capone, because I was under the impression that this was like all a 3 6 Mafia inspired soundtrack. And that they are acting in the film kind of as background characters who don't have a lot of lines. So I guess I'm wondering like, where their contribution ends and where Al Capone's contribution begins. Like, not that it really matters for Tennessee Auteurs because they're all Tennessee musicians, but I'm still curious.
Well, I guess just from looking at it right now, Al Capone did Whoop That Trick and Hustle and Flow, which Whoop That Trick is now, I guess, like the sort of like Memphis Grizzlies, like gets played at a lot of their games.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, and it's sort of become this local anthem. And also he has a song, like that song, Get Crunk, Get Buck, that's like, I guess actually attributed to Juicy J's character in the movie. But is not a song by Juicy J. But they did, It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp, which is really, I guess, like, their only, other than DJ Paul and Juicy J having a cameo in it, it's really like their only contribution. And I was surprised watching this movie that there's really not a lot of rap music in it. I mean, there's like the songs that we've mentioned that are DJ songs, and
you see them being recorded and performed.
Yeah, and there's some others, and like there's like at one point where you hear when DJ is talking to Ludacris, you hear Still Tippin' by Mike Jones playing in the background. But there's really not a lot. I mean, you have that like sort of bluesy soundtrack.
Yeah, it's like a blaxploitation funk soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I was sort of surprised by that. And I mean, I guess with the overall sort of aesthetic of the movie and like the tone, that kind of makes sense. But I do think at the same time, even though this is one of the like important points I wanted to kind of bring out about this movie, I do think even though it's not, it ends up not really being that much about rap music. I do think it is a much better movie about rap music than something like Straight Outta Compton. Which the thing about that movie that, like, one of the things that, I mean, that movie is like, so sanitized, which obviously because Ice Cube and Dr. Dre were the executive producers, they probably wanted to, leave some things out that don't make them look so great. Whereas this movie is, about a fictional person, but like uncomfortably brutal a lot of the time. But it is a really, Straight Outta Compton, like every time somebody writes a song in that movie, like Dr. Dre is like noodling on the piano or whatever, and then he stumbles upon Nothing But a G Thing, and then Snoop Dogg walks in and he's like, oh, whoa, I like this little ditty, and then starts rapping, and just like all the words magically fall into place, which, like, obviously, like, capturing any process of artistic creation on film is really hard, especially when you don't have like the actual musicians there or the actual artists and you're using actors.
But in the case of Straight Outta Compton, they do have them on set.
Yeah. Yeah, so it just like everything just magically just appears, which I feel like is sort of one of the I don't know, like this myth that people have about rap music, just because so much of it is rooted in improvisation and freestyling, that it's like this effortless music. Whereas this, it's like, it's sweaty, like it's difficult, you really see them agonizing to like make these songs. Anthony Anderson is stapling the egg cartons to the walls. Like, it's like a really, like, you see the labor of music, which is something that I do, like, I wasn't crazy about this movie, but I do really like that, particularly.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It might seem cliche, them figuring things out moments of the movie. You see that always in movies that are kind of structured like this, but I don't know, I found those moments of trying to wrangle your creativity in the kind of give and take between DJ and the Anthony Anderson character, and I think his name's Shelby, the pianist. The one white guy in
the
the
John Hawkes lookalike.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
But I liked kind of that, the energy in the way they were kind of interacting with each other in those scenes, and that also brings me to the one thing I wanted to talk about, because reading a lot about this movie in preparation, people really were going, this is Terrence Howard's moment. This is Terrence Howard's moment. Blah, and I agree. I think he's fantastic in this movie, but in the scene when they're recording "It's Hard Out Here to Be a Pimp," I mean, God, is Taraji P.
Henson
so good.
Yeah.
I really love her performance in this movie. I think that she's kind of gotten this stereotype now where she's kind of, no nonsense, no, strict business kind of characters. And here she's so vulnerable, and she's so weakened just by her environment. And whenever she has that moment where she gets to sing and just really let loose and let it out, and then afterwards when she just talks about how that meant the world to me, that really, like, that scene really moved me. She was so good in this movie.
Her character shares a first name with a character from The Color Purple. And I'm wondering if there's a connection there in terms of like the emotional rawness and the vulnerability of those characters' stories. But regardless, I agree that she was incredibly scene-stealing throughout this whole film. One thing that I wanted to bring up before we wrap up is language, because this is our sixth movie we're talking about from Tennessee, and it's really the only one, like even including Intrude in the Dust, that really leans into the unique languages that exist within the South. In Hustle and Flow, you kind of have this Russian nesting doll of languages. You have Southern English, you also have African American vernacular English, and then you also have the specific combination of Southern English, African American vernacular English in Memphis specifically. So like a slang word like buck doesn't really exist in rap outside of Memphis rap. And like Terrence Howard's memified Maine is very much a Memphis thing. Like I was talking to Michael about
accent
this.
Though, like,
what's that?
His accent just the whole time just like baffled me. I don't know. There's like this like weird, like,
No, because nobody else in the movie really has an accent like his.
Well, no one else in the movie spent a whole year with like pimps and
That's
like,
right,
sex
that's
workers
right.
and stuff.
That's true.
but-
That's true. But it also like it opens with that monologue. It's just like
Yeah.
it opens with that voice.
Now, can I ask? Does his his voice, does it like feel very Memphis like? Because I just listened earlier today to the Rewatchables podcast where they were talking about Creed, and Wesley Morris actually went on this giant rant about how Tessa Thompson in that movie annoys him because her Philadelphia accent is just so not what you would hear in actual Philadelphia. So like does Terrence Howard like sound authentic?
Are you asking me?
Yes, we're asking.
Oh, well, I think I should really qualify my Memphis credentials by saying I grew up in Collierville, which is the suburbs. And so, like, people in Collierville do not talk this way. And, however, so I don't have enough, like, insight into, like, inner city Memphis culture and specifically, like, African-American vernacular in Memphis to, like, know if this is merely, like, some weird, like, parody, like kind of an unintentional parody of Memphis dialect or not.
You did ask me when I brought up the Maine thing during the movie. You're like, "Have you never heard people say the word Maine before?"
Yeah,
like
like,
it was just a completely normalized thing.
Yeah, there
for
were
me
definitely like elements, like words and phrases that he would say that like rung true. But as far as like I probably couldn't have I couldn't tell you if this is merely like a passable imitation or like actually a really natural dialect. But
there are a lot of Tennessee actors in the film.
Yeah.
Right. Terrence Howard's not one of them, but there's a lot.
What did you? I was found the look of the movie rather interesting because it is like the entire time this very sweaty movie, and there's a lot of colors that really pop to the point where there were a few scenes that almost like hurt my eyes. And it is like so saturated in this very 2005 kind of way. But there's also something like about that I feel like, even though that, like there are a lot of movies from this time that have a similar sort of look now. I don't know, there was something about it that I felt like really complemented the just like kind of local culture, like that you have these sort of candy painted cars, like that color like reflected in the palette of the movie itself. I don't know if anyone...
Well, I was really struck by, you mentioned scenes that kind of pop out of the sweatiness of the movie. When he has that conversation with increasingly more drunk Ludacris. And that is a reverse shot scene where every shot is an extreme close-up. And you're seeing these really out of focus lights that are kind of blaring behind them. And you do get like the candy-colored cars... those colors represented in like the lights of the bar, and this is Terrence Howard's moment where he feels like this is where he's finally kind of reaching for the stars. This is his one true hope. So it gives him this like starry-eyed fantasy moment before the blaxploitation like gunfight breaks out.
I'm gonna say this, and it's not an insult, I promise. It reminded me of like Michael Bay Transformers movies.
No, I can see that. It's like
very,
drips in the same
you
way.
It's very digital. Like I can feel the digital quality. While
Yeah.
I don't think... No.
Wait, is it digital though? Is it shot in digital?
I think it was probably like digitally color corrected. I feel like it was probably that.
Yeah.
But I feel like...
Is this too early to be totally shot in digital?
it just felt very digital to me, though, in terms of like how it looked.
No,
which I felt like kind of was weird, because it wasn't like it was a very digitally focused film. I mean, for God's sake, he gives Ludacris a tape. He doesn't give him like a CD, a cassette tape. He doesn't give him like a CD or something. I don't know.
Which that's I just want to say that is like Memphis rap culture is tape culture. Like, I mean, by this point, not so much, but like, he's talking about like, your underground tapes, and like that is like there are now like obscure figures from Memphis rap in the 1990s, like Tommy Wright III and DJ Spanish Fly, who like only ever recorded on tape, and those tapes fetch like hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars online now. So, anyways, just wanted to throw that in there. Sorry.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts before we kind of wrap this up?
I want to say I'm very glad that It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp won an Oscar. I think it's maybe the only good thing that the Academy Awards have ever done. That's maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but that just like, I don't know, that performance of like seeing 3 6 Mafia at the Oscars is like the strangest thing, but also like one of the things that makes my heart the most happy. And I wish there were the other two rap songs that have ever won the Oscar for Best Original Song are Eminem and a Common song from Selma that nobody remembers.
Sort of rap.
Yeah, it's like just, I don't know, very boring. And I don't know, like I wish that there could be, maybe there will be someday, but just something like that happening is hard to imagine. I'm still rather upset with the Oscars for not even nominating Future for his song from Creed. So,
do we have? Is there any sort of like behind the scenes like rhyme or reason why like this is like hard? It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp. That's so like off brand for the Academy Awards, and it's only happened once. Like, was everyone just kind of caught up in this cultural moment with this movie, or where'd that come from?
Looking right now to see what the other songs were that year. There were 2 other songs, one from Crash and a Dolly Parton song from the movie Transamerica, which nobody remembers now.
Well,
still Tennessean would have won either way.
Yeah, it's
we may have our answer though from your.
I mean, I guess I don't know. I'm just like looking at those songs and I'm kind of like, okay.
But Michael, you also mentioned that from your memory, when this came out, there was like a big awards push for this to be nominated for Best Picture, right?
I don't remember specifically Best Picture, but it was a big deal. It even trickled down to the Memphis suburbs where I was sitting there reading the commercial appeal, and our movie critic was quite excited about this movie. And I remember it being a big deal that something, a movie that's so ingrained in Memphis and Memphis writer, director, and all that was getting such attention nationwide. And I remember this may be one of these like fabricated memories, but I have a memory of going to school the day after the Academy Awards and kids singing like 3 6 Mafia, but maybe that's false, but I definitely remember it being like really exciting because like I mentioned earlier, and this is true of like a lot of artistic things in Memphis, is that a lot of times Memphis is its own kind of self-contained world that doesn't often break on the national stage, and so it's kind of neat to see this.
And I think that's like even though 3 6 Mafia is like nationally popular, like I can definitely like see that in them, just because they are so much their sort of self-contained universe, not with like a mythology in the way that like Wu-Tang Clan or something necessarily has, but they are just like this sort of their own like little ecosystem, and just sort of like their sound seemingly came out of nowhere and they were just like their own world. And I also think this movie, this is unrelated to that point, but this movie like feels very much of another time in like 21st century film where, it like got picked up at Sundance, and it's not like a small movie. I mean, it's like a $3 million budget. But that is like relative to Hollywood, pretty small. But also the beginning of the movie, you have the like Paramount, it's distributed by Paramount Classics, which does not exist anymore.
I've never seen that logo before.
Which like became soon after, I think like it was like 2008 became Paramount Vantage. But just like, I don't know, like something like this kind of sort of small movie that's, this kind of drama. I mean, we still have movies like this sort of, but it just feels like the landscape has really changed a lot, and that this feels, I don't know, it feels more like those kind of like, people are always bemoaning the like loss of like grown up sort of mid-range movies.
Yeah, it's a $2.8 million movie, which that range doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's something that's like a serious adult movie, but it's not like for old people.
Well, in like 2005 was when like that kind of like Sundance, like the Sundance rooted indie kind of really peaked, wasn't it? I mean, like,
yeah, I feel like it was.
and that really kind of probably like through like when was I guess like Juno's 2007 gets like a Best Picture and all that, but then I feel like it kind of becomes its own, like the Sundance machine became its own worst enemy in like the next few years, and then kind of went to less,
sort of jumped the shark. I feel like
Yeah.
is what Sundance, the World of Sundance, sort of did. Yeah, it's, I don't know, it's odd to look at now.
I believe that'll wrap up this episode. You can find Cinematary on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we will be continuing our Tennessee Auteurs series with 2017's Mudbound. So yeah, this one is very easy to watch if you want to watch it ahead of time. It is on Netflix. But yeah, some real quick notes. We have a lot of new writing on the website. Go check that out. Michael and Andrew have a long overview of the Big Ears Festival. I don't think you're probably going to see a much more comprehensive review of that entire festival anywhere else on the internet, so please check that out. Also, like I mentioned before, my review of Ready Player One. We also set up a weekly newsletter. This is going to be an easy way if you miss Facebook posts or Twitter posts or whatever. This is an easy way to keep up with our new writing and our podcast episodes and all that good stuff. It'll come out every Sunday, starting in the next couple weeks. So go ahead and just sign up now. All you need is your email. It's very simple. By the time this episode airs, we'll also have a very special fun thing. Our Young Critics for 2018 ballot. It is going to be online. So that will be on the cinematary.com homepage. You can find it there. I'll also put a link in the description of this episode. But yeah, please, we're going to be voting from today, which is Friday, from this Friday till next Friday, so a whole week. And then we will announce the winners on next week's, probably on the Saturday of the next week on Twitter and Facebook and all those good things. But yeah, please check out that ballot. I think we can all speak to the fact that it's a very good one. So
Yes, for anybody who is just joining Cinematary during this Tennessee Auteurs series because you heard about it on the news or whatever, Young Critics Watch Old Movies is definitely the best thing we do. So get excited for that. Go vote in that poll. I'm really stoked for those movies.
definitely. All right. Until next week, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you then.